Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. I'm Zinara Naam Khan, and I will be hosting this talk today with George Cunningham. We are really grateful and very pleased that he could join us today and share some of his expertise with us. The topic for today is going to be EU strategy. Sorry, I kind of missed that. EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And we are just going to start. So the new Indo-Pacific strategy by the EU follows the previous measures to increase engagement with the region in the economic, security, and connectivity domains. The plan indicates a clear intent to position the EU in the emerging global and regional governance structures, focusing on strategic autonomy, inclusivity, the rules-based order, and common public good. Implementing the action plan based on the strategy is likely to face numerous challenges, including evolving and sustaining consensus on it within the EU, but it holds promise in contributing to the stability and development of the Indo-Pacific. Our speaker today is Mr. George Cunningham, who has retired from the European External Action Service in July 2021 as its strategic advisor on Asia-Pacific affairs. He is responsible for the EU's recent strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. He was the EU alternate senior official for the Asia-Europe meeting and the EU governor of the Asia-Europe Foundation. He has also previously served as the EU Deputy Ambassador to Afghanistan, the EEAS Deputy Head of Division for China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and Mongolia. He has also been the coordinator for EU-US bilateral trade relations at the EC's Trade Directorate General. He was the political counselor and the head of press public affairs at the EC's delegation to the UN in New York. He has worked for 30 years for the EU across all the main foreign policy files, especially foreign and security policy, public diplomacy, and trade. He is a member of Chatham House in London, and his book, Journey to Become a Diplomat, was published in 2005 by the Foreign Policy Association of New York. We are, again, very grateful that he's joined us today, and I would like to hand the floor over to him so that he can share his thoughts on the topic for today.
Nara, thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Super. Okay, so just to say, I'm very happy to have association with Pakistan as well through the good work that we did together in Afghanistan when I was the deputy ambassador, also with Shabazz Hussain, who is now the deputy head of mission in Brussels, and so we're very happy to, after the Afghanistan experience, to also meet up there. And through that, grateful that he was in touch with Ambassador Nadim Riaz, who he worked for originally, so that this meeting could be set up so that I can continue the good work of talking about the strategy and getting it to be known around the region, because this is maybe about the 17th talk that I'm giving on a particular subject. In fact, I had a very fruitful exchange with young Pakistani and Bangladeshi diplomats through the Cunningham Institute, which is the institute in the Netherlands, some 2 months ago as well. So here it is, and I'm very happy to continue my association with Pakistan and all the the issues concerning the region itself. So I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint, which makes it easier for you all to follow. And then I'm not sure how long I'm going to take to get through it. Let's say about 20 minutes or so, and that gives plenty of time for questions and answers, also about other European affairs, of course, which is good. You should take advantage of that. Albeit, as I said, I'm speaking as an independent person, no longer a diplomat in the European External Action Service. Many of you actually must be diplomats as well, and all I can say, or past and present, and all I can say is it's a wonderful career to be in. We are very privileged, but we're also there to serve our people, serve our citizens, and we must never lose that particular aspect of our work as we go through. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, and hopefully there's a little bit of noise outside because the work's taking place. I'm in Paris at the moment. Hopefully it's not going to disturb us too much. And I'm going to, as I said, switch now to the PowerPoint, if I may. And this should be it, hopefully. Okay. And I have to now, which I've forgotten how to do now, make it a little bit bigger, but I think you can probably read it as it is.
Sir, click on from beginning in the slideshow panel.
Click where, sorry?
From beginning.
I can't hear. From
Beginning. On your screen, there is an option from beginning.
From beginning.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe obscured by the picture. Yes, that's fine. Okay, I'm doing that. Exit, perfect. Okay, so so here we are. So as you know, the EU is a global player. It's not necessarily known too much in terms of acting as a whole. Oftentimes, when one is looking at what the EU is doing in the region, people look at individual countries like the UK, which used to be a member of the EU, of course, France, Germany, and others, but they don't necessarily look at the EU as a whole. But the EU as a whole do have programs, including programs working with Pakistan. And obviously, when we talk about many things that the EU does, we are aggregating what the member states are dealing with as well. So this is quite recent, this strategy for cooperation in Indo-Pacific. It actually happened last year. It happened very quickly by bureaucratic standards, as I would explain, because from the time the member states decided they wished the EU or the EAS actually in cooperation with the European Commission to make the strategy, it took about 4 months to get the basic structure in place and actually approved by the foreign ministers, the 27 foreign ministers. So it was a two-stage process. I will try to explain things so those of you who are not familiar with European processes. The Council conclusions, which is conclusions at the level of foreign ministers. So the first document was produced was at foreign ministers level, and that was agreed in April 2021. And then, if you like, the implementation plan of the strategy was approved as a joint communication because it's joint between the European Commission, which is our civil service, as you know, and the High Representative, which is Mr. Borrell at the moment, who is the High Representative of Common and Foreign Security Policy in September 2021. And it was sufficiently considered to be important enough to have it form part of the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union address. So in this kind of rapid thing, why was it so rapid? Why was it so considered to be so important? Well, first of all, it has to be very, very clear about the importance of the region as a whole. And the region is defined differently by different partners, and we'll come to what different partners are saying about the Indo-Pacific and what the Indo-Pacific means to certain partners as a terminology. But for us, it's defined from the east coast of Africa to the Pacific Island states. Now, there are some countries that include the Americas in the definition, but this is not included in the European definition of the region. And many actually start the definition from Pakistan, actually, going eastward. But we actually started from the east coast of Africa going eastward. So we've shifted westward, if you like, the definition that some of our partners are actually giving. But this is in line with the definition of other member states that have actually chosen the route of the Indo-Pacific approach, because it was the case that both Germany, France, and the Netherlands produced strategies first, and then the EU produced their strategy. So we had to, in a sense, there was a kind of drift. I won't say drift away from the Indo-Pacific, but there was not a lack of sufficient prioritization of the Indo-Pacific before we did the strategy. I was what we call the pen holder of the strategy, and I was seeing that, for instance, when it came to the trade policy review that was done by the European Commission that came out as late as the February 2021, the emphasis was, in terms of prioritization of regions around the world, was obviously the US-China nexus. Then you have included also the neighborhood, of course, surrounding the European Union, both to the east and to the south. But then came Africa, and in the trade policy review, there was a lot of emphasis on Africa. And then almost as an afterthought, we had the Asia-Pacific, it was called then, and also Latin America. So we looked at it, and actually we made a bit of a fuss internally, and we said, well, actually, don't you think that's rather important to have this particular region, stand out, because this is where all the growth is. And so we reminded other people of the importance, as you can see here, of the region, which is by far, in terms of economic reasons, the most important region. And so through the Indo-Pacific strategy, we kind of refocused the attention of the EU back into the region, compared to what was happening, or what was the development taking place, let's say, the year previously. So you can see here some of the statistics. I'm not going to read it out to you. You can see for yourselves. So, okay, it's quite evident that this is an important region economically. Also because, of course, when it comes to the European Union's own prosperity agenda, which is for our own citizens to actually benefit from some of the activities that we're doing internationally, the economic side is very important. And the World Economic Forum said that 9 out of 10 of the future middle class until 2030 will be coming from the region. Of course, when it comes to high-end goods and services, that's very important for us. But of course, with the good news comes the not very good news. And as you're very aware, in Pakistan, the geopolitical competition is intensifying. It's obviously the strategy is mainly sort of maritime orientated. So here we have all these supply chains and trade links that are under strain. We have the technological issues as well, political and security areas. We have the issue of the trade and the vulnerabilities, the choke points, if you like, potentially of trade if there were to be a major security problem, and particularly for us in the South China Sea, but also in the Strait of Malacca. There is, unlike European Union, where we are under Europe is under somewhat strain, of course, with the situation in Ukraine. Nonetheless, we do have a regional security order in place to try and calm the situation down, and that work is going on at the moment through the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the rotating presidency is Poland for that, which is a very important, pivotal country, of course, in the issue of the Ukraine situation. So we have mechanisms, not just NATO when it comes to regional security order or whatever, but a regional security order that tries to bring about peace and try to maintain the peace. In the region of the Indo-Pacific, military spending is rocketing, particularly China is now reputed to have a navy which is larger than that of the United States and is growing exponentially. And obviously other nations are reacting to this. And so therefore there is a big increase in military expenditure, also in Japan recently. They intend to largely increase the spend. And of course, that's because there's a lot of tension. And then we've got the issue of nuclear non-proliferation. In this particular case, DPRK in particular. Malicious cyber attacks which are going on as people are testing each other's systems. So from the benefits of globalization and the benefits of internet and so on, we have vulnerabilities which have come about. Then, of course, a particular concern for the European Union's universality of human rights is being challenged because we're seeing, particularly in countries of ASEAN, Myanmar coming under military rule. We've had Cambodia for some time now in de facto one-party rule. These are all issues which are of concern. And so, all these developments are putting quite a lot of concern, are causing a lot of concern in Europe. And we want to try and do something about it, which is positive and helpful to the region, also to help ourselves in terms of the prosperity agenda for the European Union citizens. Now, many partners have adopted Indo-Pacific strategies or policies, and here is the list actually that we've got here: Japan, Australia, India, USA, ASEAN, New Zealand, and UK. And then amongst our member states, also France, Germany, and the Netherlands had adopted these strategies. The tendency of, as we'll come to in a minute, the tendency of the concept of Indo-Pacific, the terminology, people have it in mind that this is an anti-China strategy. These strategies, I would say in the plural, are sort of anti-China, but it's not the case. But there is an emphasis on security in many of them. And in others, there's less of an emphasis on security and more on the kind of cooperation agenda. And this is why the European Union has put in its title cooperation in the Pacific, because we want to make it clear that we're not against anybody. We're trying to just improve, ties between the European Union and the region. But as you will see as well, those ties that need improving is also with countries to which we don't trade enough, which we want to have more contact with, because we don't want to have all our eggs in the basket, the China basket. We want to diversify. And so I would call this a strategy, the European Union strategy, a strategy for diversification. It is looking at all those countries and saying what the opportunities may be in those countries and where we might, have an idea of how to cooperate with those countries. Okay, and that's certainly the case with France, Germany, and the Netherlands. France a little bit more on the security side, but the more you come into the present era, the more it's the cooperation agenda that's coming through with many countries. So the clinching factor of the whole thing was that the EU was nonetheless itself rather reluctant to use the word Indo-Pacific because of this sort of anti-China connotation that had come about, particularly under in the Trump era. And so you'll find that in documents that we're writing all the time, Asia-Pacific, 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 until 2019, when we had a major conference on connectivity, which is sort of the connectivity for us is a bit similar to BRI in terms of terminology. It's to do with building networks, building infrastructure, and so on. And the EU was getting underway with the connectivity agenda, which we can come to in a lot of detail later on, worldwide, outside, because within the European Union, there's a lot of connectivity, obviously, because the internal market is interconnected through roads, rail, and so on and so forth. So EU has built this connectivity within Europe and successfully, and it's now building it in its neighborhood. And the issue was to, go wider than that. So there's a lot of expertise on connectivity in the EU, but we haven't necessarily, except from development programs, done too much outside the EU and its neighborhood. So anyway, we had this conference. And we signed a connectivity agreement with Japan, and Mr. Abe came to Brussels. It was considered to be a great honor to have him because normally the Japanese Prime Minister doesn't go to any place more than once a year, especially Europe, but he honored us with his presence for a second time. And in any case, therefore, the term Indo-Pacific appeared for the first time because the Japanese wanted to have that in the declaration. And then there was relatively very little. However, in the scramble by the EU to rebuild its relationship with the United States on the election of President Biden, or President-elect Biden, because he wasn't president even, there was a new EU-US agenda for global change, which was rushed out in December 2020. So just literally within weeks of election. Even if there was dispute still going on with the election, actually. And within that, he sort of basically looked at how can we rebuild that relationship? And what are the areas that the unions can cooperate? And then we actually then said increased EU focus on the challenge and opportunities in the Indo-Pacific region will help deepen cooperation with like-minded partners in the region. So that really committed us to that process. So, as I said, because we wanted to be really clear about it, we put the fact that the renewed commitment to the region is inclusive of all partners wishing to cooperate with the EU. So if you want to work with us, we're happy to work with you. China, any country. And then there was the issue about, the issue of like-minded countries and the issue of people working together based on, similar values. And here the EU adopted the principle of pragmatism, which is a terminology used in the EU's global strategy of 2016. And basically it means we're trying to work on a basis of principles ourselves, but we do recognize the world is not a perfect place. And so we have to somehow work together pragmatically as well with people who like us and may not perhaps necessarily share everything that we believe in or the values and so on, but they're friendly towards us. And I can give you an example of such a country being Vietnam, for instance, which does not have a particularly good human rights record. Nonetheless, it is open to cooperation with the European Union. And therefore we reciprocate in that respect. Obviously work on the issue of human rights privately through the human rights dialogue that we have with Vietnam. But on the other hand, we recognize the fact that, they want to help, and Vietnam is included in activities, some of the activities which may be, even on the common security, foreign policy and security side, that you wouldn't necessarily think you would find Vietnam there. So the way it was done in the point number 2 was we actually said adapt and build its cooperation according to specific policy areas where partners can find common ground based on shared principles, values, or mutual interest. So the original text said and mutual interest. And we all thought, actually, look, they have to give some kind of flexibility to this strategy. So it's or mutual interest. So shared principles, values, or mutual interest is the way that we found was the best for us at this point. Then we always said the Indo-Pacific strategy is not, in a sense, new, in the sense that it has a sort of fantastically new concept with aggregating together many of the things that we've already written about concerning strategies when it comes to specific sectors or specific countries. And when it comes to China, we refer to the 2019 strategic outlook on China. We say basically that they should be consistent with that. And the 2019 strategic outlook was actually caused quite a lot of controversy at the time, or not controversy, but interest, let's say, from the media, because it was the first time we used the word strategic rival as a description, one of the 4 descriptions about China's relationship with the EU. So there, in the strategic outlook, we said, it can be a cooperative partner, a negotiating partner, a competitor, or it can be a strategic rival, depending on the relations, depending on the topic between the EU and China. We are operating at these 4 levels. We're not just thinking of China in one way. We look at the different facets of China, because it's a very complicated area, very complicated relationship. And we judge, what China does in terms of our interests and our principles. And then we, it gets slotted into these 4 categories, if you like, notionally at least. Okay, so it's all inclusive, it's all beautiful, we're flexible, but those countries that have already announced Indo-Pacific approaches, which you've seen the list before, we want to particularly work with them. And one of the advantages of having an Indo-Pacific strategy is that you are saying to everybody who other people have an Indo-Pacific strategy, this is what we are, what we mean by this Indo-Pacific. So we understand, for instance, when it comes to ASEAN and their Indo-Pacific outlook, so we understand what ASEAN believes when it uses that word Indo-Pacific, and these are the areas that ASEAN wants cooperation. Okay, and we go along, we say, okay, we have an Indo-Pacific strategy, and these are all the areas that we can offer cooperation, and what can we do together? Okay, so that's the value as well of having an Indo-Pacific approach. And of course, the Indo-Pacific approach does acknowledge the centrality of ASEAN, this famous terminology. Basically, everything that happens in the ASEAN area is ASEAN itself is central to. So it's a strategy which is broad-based. And this is really kind of like, is the order of the chapters within the strategy of the joint communication when it comes to the implementation. And therefore, it gives you a kind of idea also the hierarchy of importance to the European Union of these different areas in terms of the region. Okay, so you will notice that security is not by any means top of the list. It's actually quite way down. And what we're interested first and foremost is the prosperity for our citizens, which is of course mutual prosperity also with the people of the region, because obviously the two go together. So sustainable and inclusive prosperity is a key factor. And here we are talking about a lot of free trade agreements, but I'll come to that in a minute. We have the green transition, as you know, the signature policy of the European Commission under the Commission President von der Leyen, and COP26, and everything to do with greening is of great importance to us and also to the planet, of course, which is we have what they call now the climate crisis taking place, which I'm sure you're seeing aspects of in Pakistan as well. We have ocean governance because, of course, you know, Indo-Pacific has the concept of the maritime primarily rather than land. Digital governance, which is again alongside greening, is a priority of the European Commission. And so this is, if you like, the externalization of the internal policies of the European Union. Okay, connectivity, which we can come to in more detail, which is a difficult thing for the EU to do. And as I said, we can go into that in more detail because, of course, of your BRI. Then we have security and defense, and then we have human security, which is health systems, human rights, disaster risk reduction, where Pakistan cooperates a lot with the EU on the disaster risk reduction as well. And of course, in the typical bureaucratic and diplomatic way, it's underpinned by partnerships and dialogues. We're very into regional organizations, as the EU is a kind of regional organization. So it believes in this multilateralism. It believes in people working together. And so there is quite a strong emphasis in the strategy for regional cooperation, and in particular fisheries, actually, where the EU is a member of a lot of the fishery organizations. In fact, when I was the charge d'affaires in New Zealand for the European Union, I actually signed an agreement, fisheries agreement, for the South Pacific, European Union and the South Pacific. And bearing in mind, of course, that France has 1.5 million citizens in the Indo-Pacific, and many of them are based in the Pacific, in New Caledonia and so on. So very much the EU is actually very much in the region through France, its member state. And when it comes to the South Pacific and fisheries, we have Portuguese and Spanish ships as well, which are very much fishing in the area. So it is global. And intensified cooperation in multilateral fora is very important. As you are aware, you know, there have been various votes taking place at the United Nations, particularly in the Human Rights Council, which, let's say, could have been stronger when it comes to human rights issues. And we want to see more cooperation, of course, in those kind of areas between not just the like-minded, but between countries like Pakistan, which I think is pretty important. So, as I said, mutual economic prosperity is center stage in the whole process. The whole issue is diversification. It's not all to do with China, it's to do with everybody. Lots of opportunities with India, with Japan, with South Korea, with ASEAN, with Australia, and so on and so forth. Diversify. One of the interesting things about the joint communication, if you read this afterwards, is that we identify the countries that we think we should be working with, or we are already starting to work with. So it's quite detailed and lists countries when it comes to digitalization, when it comes to maritime governance and so on and so forth. It's rich, actually, in terms of research cooperation, for instance. What will be the countries in which we prioritize in that respect. But it's not just what we think are the right countries. And of course, they wouldn't be mentioned if we hadn't already approached them. I'd be embarrassed if they turn around and say, no, you don't want to cooperate with you. But it's an open system in the sense that if Pakistan wants to cooperate, under the Indo-Pacific approach strategy in particular areas, that it's welcome to talk to the European Union. Because we're happy to cooperate with anybody where we have this mutual interest in mind. So the resilience and sustainable global value chain is an important area. Of course, that again is a diversification potentially as well as trying to do more at home, actually, of course, which is important because everybody's realized through COVID-19 that we didn't have enough home production of things. Everything was outsourced, which is fine in a perfectly functioning globalized world, but unfortunately it's not the case at the moment. And of course, oftentimes they say the European Union is a superpower when it comes to technical standards and norms. And so we want to continue that work because many of the technical standards which are produced in the European Union are adopted globally. And we want to ensure that when it comes to this, particularly the digital world, it's in line with universal values. That we think that's important. We have to have, well, it's not just the mantra of an open, free Indo-Pacific when it comes to maritime, but also when it comes to digital. We'd like to see that very much everybody has an equal chance to be involved, and everybody can communicate with each other. There's no sort of blockages or manipulation of the system. Unfortunately, too much the case at the moment. Anyway, so when it comes to the trade, then it was, if you compare with when I started, I talked about the trade policy review and how little it had on the Indo-Pacific. There's where we did a lot of work here to reorientate the EU. And so in the trade policy review, Australia and New Zealand were mentioned, where already trade negotiations are taking place, but there was no ambition apart from that was particularly mentioned. And as you can see, added have been now India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand have been mentioned. When the time is right, we're going to go ahead. We had an EU-India summit soon after the launch of the Council conclusions of the strategy. And we signed a connectivity agreement with India. And also there was a move towards trying to begin, to start scoping potentially for a free trade agreement with India. I say that's quite far off, but the principle was put down. Then there was also mentioned in the strategy an ASEAN region-to-region trade agreement in the long term as well. So there was quite a big advance in terms of the EU's thinking about the region in terms of as usual, the prosperity agenda. Economic partnership agreements, the Pacific and the East Africa community, not forgetting, of course, that Africa is part of the strategy. Here we are in the situation where we have this ACP agreement, Africa, Caribbean and Pacific partnerships. And the new one, the post-Cotonou agreement is, I think, especially for the Pacific, has been negotiated. And there should be a signature at some point coming, I think, for ACP as a whole. I'm not sure where the position is with Africa and the Caribbean. But here again, there's a great opportunity through the funding programs to do more in this respect. Green alliances and partnerships. Here you have the EU has produced its first green alliance, which is a sort of higher end, higher ambition greening agenda with Japan, and is in discussion with, I think, South Korea. And the sort of not so high, but still important level is called partnerships, green partnerships, And the EU, I think, is open and working with a number of countries in that respect. This, of course, is all to do with creating standards and objectives and goals and working together in the various climate change negotiation formats. Then digital and connectivity partnerships. And here, rather ambitiously, the Global Gateway, which is a new connectivity strategy, was launched after the Indo-Pacific one. And that is effectively the building of an infrastructure networks globally, in conjunction, by the way, with a similar approach by the United States and by Japan. We can come back to that. And then just underneath there, you've got the Horizon Europe. Cooperation on research and development, particularly with like-minded countries, is also very much on the agenda. And in the strategy, we list the countries again with which we are in discussion to cooperate more intensely in terms of research and development. So on the security side, because as I said, got the economic prosperity and what we were after there, but then there's the worry about, well, how stable is the region. So here we have some of the ways, and it's actually quite a lot of it in the joint communication, because even if the European Union itself does not have any kind of military, we rely entirely on our member states for that. There's more cooperation taking place, and also between our member states under the EU umbrella and Indo-Pacific countries. So we look at ways of exploring ways of enhancing naval deployments by EU member states to protect sea lines of communication and freedom of navigation, the famous UNCLOS. And for the first time, the strategy talks about a meaningful European naval presence in the Indo-Pacific, which was an advance in terms of thinking. And we'll come to this in a minute, but under the French presidency of the European Union, which is taking place at the moment, a move is underway to create a first maritime area of interest, what they call a maritime area of interest, an area where there is an enhancement of European naval presence in the Indo-Pacific. That's in discussion at the moment, but of course, there is complications with the Ukraine issue in terms of deployments of anything significant, or anything for that matter, in the Indo-Pacific region, apart from what is already present, which is for the French naval presence, of course, through its territories in the Pacific. So we're also working with the Pacific partners, capacity for maritime security, joint exercises, noting, for instance, and it's in the thing that Pakistan, there was joint exercises between the EU member state navies and Pakistan as one of the many navies that were cooperating, and there'll be more joint exercises and port calls taking place between Indo-Pacific as well as EU member state navies. And the EU naval force Atalanta, which is, as you know, the anti-piracy force off the coast of Somalia that many countries have been involved with and used basically as a mode of training as well, of cooperation between navies, navies of European Union, navies of the Indo-Pacific. Then we have the opportunity for, that we have something like 18 missions in different parts of the world concerning the Common Security and Defense Policy, CSDP. So we have signed agreements with some countries if they wish to participate in some of those missions, which are a lot to do with police missions, in fact, rather than necessarily military. So the EU is very into the policing aspect. So there's an opening there for countries to take an interest and do it. I believe at the moment we don't have any, although we have signed with some countries, I believe that participation hasn't yet happened, but it's very much something that we welcome as potential. Then we have strengthened cooperation with certain partners on counterterrorism, cybersecurity, maritime security, and crisis management. And I recall that there was a recent event taking place in Pakistan between the EU and Pakistan concerning an aspect of counterterrorism. I think it's actually to do with a border border checks. I think that was the main thing that was involved, and there was some kind of ceremony, I think, that took place last month on that. a launch of some kind of rules and regulations on that. Then when it came to expanded security and defense dialogues, including more partners, and engaged strongly in the ASEAN Regional Forum. And as I said, the EU's first maritime area of interest may be declared shortly, depending on what's the possibility. Excuse my throat, recovering from a cold, not happily COVID. Okay, so what are the next steps? We're coming to the end now. So basically, the strategy lays out many options for cooperation with the EU, and it's been warmly greeted by our partners because it's non-threatening. People are happy with it. People see the logic behind it, that it's common prosperity. Some have already officially suggested areas to work with. So some countries have come and said, okay, well, you wanted the ocean governance, well, why don't we do this together, or such like things. So obviously it's an area where we are open. The EU, that were member states and the European Parliament, are getting the message out to the region. That's where a lot of work is going on in that respect as well. Of course, this is part of it, even if I'm not officially doing it as a person that was the pen holder. I do it as a matter of interest to everybody because I have a lot of good inside information how things were done. The European Union has summits with India, Japan, US, and Canada. These are all countries that have Indo-Pacific approaches, except Canada, that is planning to have one, but somehow, for some reason, hasn't developed it yet. They've been talking about it for some time, but it doesn't come out. But nonetheless, potentially there's there. Of course, the EU has summits as well with China. And if China wants to have Indo-Pacific on the agenda, I'm sure that's also possible, but it's normally not the case that they wish to have it there. And then the French presidency is very important. Why is it? Well, I've already mentioned the importance of the French presidency. It's on now. We have this rotating presidency of the European Union. The member states take turns, according to the street rota. And we happen to be in the French presidency, which is very fortuitous because the French are holding a ministerial meeting in which many Indo-Pacific partners have been invited on the 22nd of February in Paris. So in about 2 weeks' time, to talk about cooperation at the EU level. So the High Representative, Mr. Borrell, will be present. It is a foreign ministers meeting. And then we'll see what comes from then. Perhaps the first maritime area of interest will be declared at that. We shall see where we are with Ukraine. Much will depend on the Ukraine crisis. So this is just really the last slide. It just gives you a sum up. So some people have said the EU strategy is the third way, the famous third way. Doesn't take any sides, non-threatening, and therefore widely welcomed. Not even China has said anything against it. The Chinese have not said anything about the German one, the French one, the Netherlands one, and the European Union one strategy. In fact, when we launched the strategy, when the council conclusions actually came, where the foreign ministers agreed that there should be a strategy and what the basic outline of that strategy should be, we had the EU delegation did organize a meeting in Beijing to talk to the Chinese about it. So I think that was a good thing to do in terms of people understanding where we're coming from concerning this strategy. So the Asian partners are keen for the EU's involvement and have a large palette of choices for their cooperation. Then, of course, we had Brexit, which is a very unfortunate thing that happened to the European Union, very unnecessary. And the recent AUKUS agreement, unnecessarily rocked the boat among the like-minded. So I think work has to be done to mend relations. Already, of course, I think the US-French side was quickly mended. Australian side less so. Not sure where we are on that one at the moment. But this was all to do, of course, you will recall, there was a submarine deal as well, in which abruptly the Australians cancelled that deal with France and went, I think, with other partners. And this caused a rumpus because there was no warning given about AUKUS taking place, being agreed, which came about at the same time as the strategy of the European Union was launched in September, so that was also bad timing. And anyway, so we're not part of AUKUS, we're not US, we're not UK, not Australia, and we stay out of that. Then, of course, as I said, with the maritime area of interest, we don't have so many naval resources. In particular, as of course, it must be recalled that the UK left the EU, and the UK and France are the biggest providers of naval vessels. Doesn't mean there isn't cooperation going on. The UK continues to be engaged on, cooperating on security and defence matters with the EU and NATO. But it does mean that you don't quite have that heft of vessels that you need to do more than than the little that can be done given the situation. So the naval resources means an issue, and as well, and some member states are worried about going further than the neighborhood. Nonetheless, the Japanese Prime Minister summed up quite well, pardon misspelling of strategy there, and said, considering the stability of the region, it's extremely important for European and US countries to be interested and involved in Asia's security environment. So thank you for listening to me. I hope that is useful to you. And I try to sort myself out with my computer and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really informative for all of us, and we really enjoyed listening to that. So I'm just going to go straight into the questions so that we don't take up too much time. So we have a question here from Mr. Azhar Mahmood, who wants to ask that since this region is really important due to oil and trade routes, so one of the questions that he's asking is, what are the key interests of the EU in the Indo-Pacific region? And secondly, he's saying that what would the possible impacts of this strategy be on China, specifically on the Chinese economy?
Okay, well, shall I take several questions then, and then maybe I'll do it in groups? Would that be okay? Or you want me to take them one by one? Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. I think you were stuck there for a bit.
Right, so look, I think this whole business with COVID-19 and the difficulties concerning supply, and also the rivalry between the US and China, does pose quite a lot of problems for the European Union. The European Union wants to have peace and prosperity. Really, we don't want to fight anybody. We just want to get on with the business of growing the world, and everybody hopefully taking advantage of the benefits of it. So nobody at this moment is talking about pulling out of China. I think that's not on the cards. The supply chains are so well established that it's difficult to do anything, but simply to try to find alternative sources of supply, so that we can, if there's disruption, then we can source different things. We're particularly conscious of that when it comes to the Ukraine crisis, where we are so reliant on Russian gas, for instance. And there's been an interesting development in the sense that the US has been very active in trying to find alternative sources of gas, including, of course, gas from the United States, in the case there is conflicts and in case there is a cutoff of gas supplies to the European Union by Russia. I think that's a very illustrative example of over-reliance on one country. So we're conscious of that when it comes to China as well. And the more countries then we can invest, the better. Areas where particularly we're concerned about is rare earths and semiconductors. And there, what's interesting is Taiwan's, being the lead supplier of semiconductors. And the need, therefore, for and the importance of Taiwan for the European Union in terms of its well-being. and the needs, and it was announced yesterday, the European Union is also beginning the process of building capacity for its own semiconductors. It has apparently been doing a lot of work in terms of design, in terms of conceptualization, but not in terms of production. And so those production facilities will now be built within the European Union. So I think it's a very unfortunate thing, but because of tensions, people have to become more self-reliant again, which is an inward-looking thing. So I don't think that's a good thing, when we should be all outward-looking and cooperating. But that's the nature of what is taking place at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll just move on to the next question. The next question is that given the limited capacity of EU countries' naval forces, enhancing and sustaining a naval presence and deployments along the Western Indian Ocean will be difficult. While France can be supported in increasing its deployments, how do you see the visibility under specifically the EU flag increasing in the future?
Yeah, well, in fact, we have started doing it with the EU flag. More frequently. So yes, I think there will be an increase definitely in EU flagging of naval vessels, member state naval vessels. Normally, they oftentimes they do the flagging actually in port call visits. When it comes to the open sea, then they normally revert back to member states. But when it comes to port visits, they then use the EU flag to note the presence of the EU. Yes, it's there are limitations to the naval presence. The deployments that took place in 2021, notably, was this UK strike aircraft carrier, of course not member of the EU, but it did have a Netherlands frigates that accompanied it as part of that task force that went down to the South China Sea. And one of the task force, which I think was British actually, so not the EU, went down the Taiwan Straits actually as a sign of freedom of navigation, straight down the middle, actually, to get it right. If you're not good to get it wrong, then you're in trouble. So yes, so Netherlands went down there. The Germans frigate went down as well, and was visiting the South China Sea as well. It was originally going to also do a port call to Shanghai, but it was cancelled by the Chinese because the Chinese didn't like some of the movements of the German frigates. So the Germans were open to incorporate China in the broader deployment, but the Chinese decided that it wasn't for them. So that's limited, yeah. But of course, you have the big naval base in New Caledonia for France, and you have quite a big deployment in the Pacific by France, and therefore that will continue to be of importance to the EU as a whole. That one of our largest member states does have this big presence in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have some more questions here. So the next question is that how do you see the EU balancing engagement with China while pushing back where required, as was mentioned in the joint communication, keeping in mind that the inclusion of China in the conceptualization of Indo-Pacific has been debated, and China has also shown opposition to the Indo-Pacific framework?
Yes, but as I said, although China feels that the concept Indo-Pacific is against them, it has been the case that in the majority of the Indo-Pacific strategies that have been produced, including the one of the European Union, we are not targeting China. We are simply diversifying as much as possible our options so that not all our eggs are in one's basket. So that's important thing to say. So really, I don't think the EU is doing some kind of balancing act as such, but it obviously wants to ensure that it's the potential what it can do is spread widely with as many partners as possible, so that we are not sort of locked into a situation where we find ourselves in deficit. Well, if you look at, for instance, rare earths at the moment, China is producing many of the rare earths, and other sources need to be found. And Pakistan will be familiar with the fact, for instance, that in Afghanistan, there are 15 out of the 17 rare earths can be found in Afghanistan. And that is a huge potential if only we can stabilize the country and make it more free and democratic, or bring in, not more, but have some semblance of democracy in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just going to press upon you for just a few more questions. There's a question here that is that there are potential flashpoints in East Asia for conflicts over Taiwan and South China Sea. If any conflicts occur in the future, what will be the stance or role of the EU?
Well, that's a tricky one. Obviously, we have our issues back home with Ukraine, with Russia. These may not go away. Actually, there may be that we will not have conflict this time around, maybe, we don't know, but it won't go away as an issue, and therefore the need for us to have our main sort of military interest and deployments will need to remain in our neighborhood, I would say. The only thing I would say is that France takes a great deal of interest. Well, we all take a great deal of interest, obviously, in continuing the freedom of the individual in Taiwan. That, of course, Taiwan, we have a one China policy, so Taiwan is part of one China. So this we continue with, obviously, because it's the rule of law as well. But obviously we want to maintain, we have a liberal democracy in Taiwan, so it's important that that is maintained. So would anyone come to the help of Taiwan? That would be very difficult for the European Union to do that, albeit it must be said that for the first time last year, the French had military maneuvers with the Japanese. So the Japan is, of course, very concerned about the situation because Taiwan is directly next door. And I would say that any kind of conflict that may arise in Taiwan may drag in, similar to the Ukraine, may spill over and have a domino effect. So it's not something that should be at all thought of as a solution by China or anyone else in terms of any kind of development of this flashpoint in the wrong direction.
Thank you so much. If that's all, do we have any other questions? Does anyone want to add anything? I'm just going to wait for a bit and see if there are any more questions. Okay, I think so. Now I would like to hand the floor over to Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President IRS, to give his closing remarks.
It was really lovely listening to you, George. I found myself really educated by what you said about the entire strategy. I mean, if one has to really sum it up, like I would say that the strategy does have a wide scope. It has basically got a non-controversial approach. It focuses on inclusivity. And but it has the intent to cooperate with China on mutually accepted terms. I think though the strategy came out in April 2021, from what I know, I'm not very sure, George, whether an action plan has finally come out. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, well, the way I see it is that the Council conclusions of April gave the political direction, and I was involved, in the drafting of all that quite heavily. And then what I would say is the implementation, the intention to implement is the joint communication of September. And I'm not sure it'll be more than that, because what then happens is that in those silos, such as trade, such as digital, such as connectivity, which, by the way, we haven't talked much about. Then we have they're going to have their own plans. It's going to be done sector by sector, so there will not be a kind of joint action plan. The implementation, I think, is the joint communication, which lists the countries under each subheading, which at the moment we want to cooperate with, or we've identified and started cooperation. But as I said, I think it's open. It's an open thing, so that countries like Pakistan can come in and using the label Indo-Pacific or whatever they want to do, whatever you would like to do. If you're worried about Indo-Pacific as a label, talk about cooperation in some of those other areas. And of course, there is this action plan, if you like, for EU-Pakistan cooperation, which I believe exists as well, which has some of the areas, actually. It incorporates some of those areas. So nothing more as far as I know in terms of an actual physical grid with what you're going to do.
Plus, George, like, I mean, in my opinion, and I may be completely a bit wrong on this thing, because, I have not been associated with the EU since I left my last assignment in Rome in 2020. I think that resource allocation is going to be an issue for the implementation of this plan. Then, like, I think all the EU countries, like, there's a block of 27 countries, but they have their own political will. So at times, like, it's the area of gray, which in which countries will always tend to differ regarding to what extent the implementation has to be done. And then let's not forget that I think about 18 countries, I mean, if I'm not wrong about the figure, 18 countries of the EU are also supportive of the of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think that is also something which will come in. And then, like you so rightly pointed out, that I think the coming few months will be important regarding the French presidency, because the basic thing is after the departure of the United Kingdom from the EU, the only naval presence which is left in this area is of France. I don't think there is a naval presence of any other country. So I think these are the challenges, in my opinion, which will be there. But should they be overcome, then I think that this could be an effective strategy to actually propagate the European viewpoint and the European outlook for this particular area.
Nadim, your professionalism targets well. So let me give you some answers, because actually there's a whole area I forgot, which is the which I shouldn't do at all, because it's very important, which is the funding area. So by coincidence, the strategy comes at a time where the programming for the next 7 years of the assistance budget was taking place. And so one of my tasks was that I put hooks in the regional pot of money of the development assistance, so that one could draw money from that, the allocation for 2021 to 2027 for Indo-Pacific matters. So when it comes to people indeed wanting to implement, there will be the ability to get the money for it. So that was done. And also there's a peace facility that has been created, and one can draw on that as well where necessary. Now this is, as usual, is not for military things, except of course for soft kind of military cooperation. Yes, that would be used for that kind of thing, but not for, of course, building ships or anything like this. This is a factor that's important for member states to reflect upon in terms of the hard power that they actually have. So the funding is actually available. Now, I think that the sustainability of interest in the Indo-Pacific post-French presidency, well, obviously the French presidency is very much pushing for it. What happens afterwards? Well, I guess what's left is that the prosperity agenda will govern, and there'll be continued interest in the whole issue of the economic side. Security side, interests will be maintained by the European External Action Service on behalf of the EU. I'm sure that will be the case because the High Representative is pretty clear about that. But as I said, moving into any sort of hard power is not likely, and it's not the job of the European Union to get involved in that, except of course in terms of crisis management, and coordination of our member states. When it comes to BRI, I think it's not meant to be in competition with BRI, what is being done. I speak also not just as a former EU official, but also as a person who's looked into this in quite a lot of detail. And I know how important BRI is to Pakistan and how grateful Pakistan is towards China in this respect. I have nothing against BRI. Well, I do have a few things, but it's not as significant as other people. The connectivity agenda will be very difficult for the European Union because it just it believes it can raise a lot of money through the private sector and so on, because this is the way it has to be done, because all other funds are, of that scale, of that large scale, are already committed. And that's going to be difficult because already for the last 2 years, we've tried to do it for Asia, in terms of the connectivity strategy of 2018, and not much has occurred apart from the usual, which is, of course, our development assistance is used to help build infrastructure and work together with partners. And that's been going on for some time, and that's going to continue going on. The question is, what is going to be added to it? And if you bear in mind that the BRI has existed now for 8 years, and now connectivity is coming up as the issue for the EU and for US and for Japan, or the combined efforts of the three might lead to something. I think it's very, very difficult in terms of, again, finding the money. And not only that, but finding a strategic approach, because the Chinese approach has been very strategic concerning BRI. And you'd have to see, because there's so much reliance on the private sector when it comes to what the EU wants to do, whether it will be strategic or whether it'll be, taking opportunities. Basically, an extension of the prosperity agenda, which is that we are creating prosperity by, for instance, building metro stations. One of the things that the EU has been doing a lot of is metro stations in India. And it's become a specialist actually in building metro systems in India. So by the way, for Pakistan, that could be interesting, but it's not exactly strategic, right? So you're not doing the strategic approach. It's more a private sector approach. So again, it's non-threatening. It's okay. It's for the benefit of the people and so on. It's a bit slow compared to BRI. Better quality, they say, than BRI. More durable and so on, or sustainable. But we'll have to see, in reality, how that comes about. And probably the way it will come about is that we will, the best thing is to concentrate on things which are not to do with infrastructure, but to do with digital, to do with air agreements. For instance, CATA, which is the Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement, which has been signed between ASEAN and the EU, which could build a large, depending if we go back to air flights and depending on COVID-19, could provide a boost for economies by business links. These are the kind of things which for me is much more practical in terms of building the prosperity agenda than going into hardcore infrastructure. Nonetheless, there'll be attempts to do that. Whether the EU will be successful, I don't know. We'll have to see. But if you want a metro system, I think the European Investment Bank is the place to go.
Thank you very much, George. It was really a pleasure listening to you. The talk was very, very informative, and but my apologies that you had to get up a bit early
for a tired person.
So thank you very much. On behalf of the Institute of Regional Studies, I would like to thank you for your very, very informative talk. And could we request you, if it is possible, is it that you could share the slides which you showed with us, so that we can use them for our knowledge and for some of our researchers to look into it and to analyze the policy much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to say, if I could just say one thing. So just to say, apart from great thanks, and hopefully that good cooperation for the longer term, of course, in other areas which you may find interesting, EU, China, Afghanistan, of course, where I served and where I take a continued interest and so on, I think might be interesting for you. I also want to say that I wrote an article or a paper for the Sasakawa Foundation USA, which perhaps you could make available to everybody that attended as well. And that gives a full explanation, further explanation, if you like, of what I was mentioning, and gives more detail, and that can be shared as well. Thank you.
Thank you, George. The basic thing is, I think you have some sort of a magic eye that you were able to see what I was typing on my telephone, because that's the message I was just about to send to you, that we could agree upon an area on which we would like you to have a talk with us. It was really informative. It was very nice listening to you, and I look forward to a very meaningful engagement with you in future. Thank you very much, and have
all the very best, and best wishes to Pakistan. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.